It happened on a busy street in downtown Chicago. People rushed past, cars honked, vendors shouted, and in the middle of all that noise, a little girl walked with a strange stiffness in her steps, like she was trying not to look afraid. Behind her, a man kept one hand on her shoulder, too close. Too controlling. And every time she slowed down, his fingers tightened. No one noticed. No one cared except the man standing beside a black SUV surrounded by his bodyguards, Marco Bellini, the city's most feared mafia boss. The little girl saw him. Their eyes met for 1 second. And in that single second, she lifted her hand and made a silent signal. A signal Marco recognized instantly. The same rescue gesture victims are taught to use when they're being taken by someone they don't know. The bodyguard frowned. Marco froze because a girl that young doesn't make that signal. By accident. And the man holding her wasn't her father. He wasn't even pretending to be. Stay with me until the end because what Marco discovered about that little girl and why she chose him of all people shocked everyone involved. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let us get into it. Marco Bellini had built his empire on reading people. In his world, missing a single detail could mean the difference between walking home and ending up in a concrete foundation somewhere under Lake Michigan. He spent 30 years perfecting the art of observation, watching body language, catching lies before they fully formed on people's lips. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. The girl couldn't have been more than 8 years old. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. And she wore a bright yellow dress that should have made her look cheerful. Instead, she looked like a flower wilting in real time. Her shoulders were hunched forward. Her eyes darted nervously from face to face in the crowd, and she kept trying to slow down. Even though the man behind her pushed her forward relentlessly. Marco's bodyguard, Vincent, noticed his boss had stopped moving. The conversation about their next shipment died mid-sentence as Vincent followed Marco's gaze to the strange pair walking through the crowd. "What's got your attention, boss?" Marco didn't answer immediately. His eyes were locked on the girl's face, studying every micro-expression. She was terrified, but she was also calculating, smart. Too smart for her own good, maybe. That's when she did it again. The signal was subtle, almost invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. Her right hand came up near her chest, facing outward like she was adjusting her dress, then her thumb tucked inward against her palm and her 4 fingers folded down over, trapping the thumb completely. She held it for exactly 3 seconds before letting her hand drop back. Marco's blood turned to ice water in his veins. He'd seen that signal before, but never from a child. Law enforcement had been teaching it to potential victims for years. A silent way to communicate distress when speaking wasn't safe. The fact that this little girl knew it meant someone had taught her well. The fact that she was using it meant she was in serious trouble. The man walking behind her looked completely ordinary. Average height, brown hair, wearing a navy blue jacket and jeans. He could have been anyone's uncle, anyone's neighbor, anyone's coworker. But Marco had spent decades learning to see past surfaces, and what he saw beneath this man's careful normally made his stomach turn. The grip on the girl's shoulder was too firm, too possessive. The man's eyes swept the crowd constantly, not like someone enjoying a walk through the city, but like someone watching for threats. His other hand stayed buried deep in his jacket pocket. And Mark could see the outline of something bulky pressed against the fabric. Most telling of all was how the girl reacted to him. She never looked up at his face, never smiled, never showed any sign of comfort or familiarity. Children with their parents or guardians moved differently. They chatted. They pointed at interesting things. They asked questions. They felt safe enough to be curious about the world around them. This girl moved like a prisoner being escorted to her cell. Marco had built his reputation on making calculated decisions. But something about this moment stripped away all his careful planning. Maybe it was the way the girl's eyes had found his across the crowded street, but she somehow sensed that he was different from everyone else rushing past. Maybe it was the desperate hope he'd seen flash across her face when she realized he was actually watching her instead of looking through her like the rest of the world. Or maybe it was because she reminded him of someone he'd lost a long time ago. Vincent was getting impatient, shifting his weight from foot to foot and checking his watch. The meeting they were supposed to attend was starting in 20 minutes, and Marco's punctuality was legendary in their organization. Being late sent messages that Marco never intended to send. "Boss, we really need to move. The Torino family doesn't like to be kept waiting." Marco held up one finger. A gesture that immediately silenced Vincent and made the other bodyguards straighten to attention. In their world, when Marco Bellini raised that finger, everything else stopped mattering. The girl and her captor were moving further down the street. Now, weaving through clusters of tourists and business people heading home from work. Marco could see them clearly from his position, but they were getting harder to track as more people filled the sidewalk during the evening rush. That's when the man made his mistake. He pulled the girl into an alley between two buildings. A narrow space barely wide enough for a single car. It was the kind of place where screams got swallowed by brick walls and broken glass, where things happened the outside world never heard about. Marco had spent enough time in places like that to know exactly what they were for. The decision formed his mind before he consciously made it. He turned to Vincent and spoke in the tone that had commanded respect and obedience for 3 decades. "Change of plans. Follow me. Stay back 20 feet. And don't interfere unless I tell you to." Vincent's eyebrows shot up. "Boss, what about the meeting?" "The meeting can wait." "This can't." Marco started walking toward the alley, his expensive Italian shoes clicking against the pavement with each measured step. Behind him, he could hear Vincent muttering instructions to the other bodyguards, the sound of safeties being disengaged, the rustle of jackets being adjusted to provide easier access to concealed weapons. But Marco's attention was focused entirely on the narrow opening between the buildings where a little girl in a yellow dress had just disappeared with a man who definitely wasn't taking her home to her parents. The alley was darker than the street, shadows stretching long and deep between the towering walls on either side. Marco could hear voices echoing off the brick. One high and frightened, one low and threatening. He couldn't make out the words yet, but the tones told him everything he needed to know. He was running out of time. As Marco approached the mouth of the alley, he could see them about 50 feet in near a dumpster that reeked of rotting food and something worse. The man had positioned himself between the girl and the street, cutting off her escape route. His hand was no longer on her shoulder. Instead, he was reaching into his jacket pocket, the same pocket Marco had noticed earlier. The girl was pressed against the brick wall, her yellow dress bright against the grimy surface. Even from this distance, Marco could see that she was crying, but she wasn't making any sound. Smart kid. She knew that screaming would only make things worse. That's when Marco stepped into the alley and cleared his throat. His throat. The sound echoed through the narrow space like a gunshot. Both the man and the girl spun around, their faces showing completely different emotions. The girl's eyes filled with desperate hope. The man's face twisted with rage and something much more dangerous. "Excuse me," Marco said, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made seasoned criminals break into cold sweats. "I think you might be lost." The man's hand froze halfway out of his jacket pocket. He was smart enough to recognize danger when it walked up and introduced itself. And everything about Marco Bellini screamed danger. The expensive suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month. The confident posture of someone who never backed down from anything in his life. The way he stood perfectly still while somehow managing to fill the entire alley with his presence. But it was Marco's eyes that really got the message across. They were the kind of eyes that had seen things most people couldn't imagine. Done things that would give normal people nightmares. And right now they were focused with laser intensity on the man who dragged a terrified child into a dark alley. "I'm sorry," the man stammered, trying to force his voice to sound normal. "This is my daughter. We were just taking a shortcut home." Marco took one step closer, and that single step seemed to drop the temperature in the alley by 10 degrees. "Your daughter," he repeated, like he was tasting the words and finding them bitter. "That's interesting." The girl pressed herself harder against the brick wall, but her eyes never left Marco's face. She could sense the shift in power, could feel that something had changed in her favor, but she was still too scared to move or speak. "What's interesting about it?" the man asked. And now his voice was getting defensive. His hand started moving toward his jacket pocket again. A movement that didn't go unnoticed. Marco's smile was colder than a Chicago winter. "What's interesting is that your daughter just spent the last 10 minutes trying to get someone's attention by making distress signals. Professional distress signals. The kind they teach kids to use when they're being taken by strangers." The man's face went white, then red, then white again. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Behind Marco, footsteps echoed off the alley walls as Vincent and the other bodyguards took their positions, blocking any possible escape route. Now Marco took another step forward, and this time the man actually backed up until he hit the opposite wall. "You know what else is interesting?" Marco continued, his voice never rising above a conversational level. "Your daughter doesn't look at you like daughters look at their fathers. She doesn't stand near you like she feels safe. And she's been crying, but not the kind of crying kids do when they're having a tantrum. Kind of crying they do when they're terrified." The girl found her voice then, small and shaky, but determined. "He's not my dad," she whispered. "My real dad is in the army. This man took me from the park where I was playing." The words hit the alley like a bomb going off. Marco's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. Something that made even his own bodyguards take an unconscious step backward. The man who'd been trying to blend into the brick wall started shaking visibly. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Marco asked the girl, his voice gentling completely. "Emma," she said, and then added with the kind of precision that only scared kids possess. "Emma Rodriguez. I'm 8 years old and I live at 247, Maple Street with my mom and my grandma. This man said he knew where my daddy was and he could take me to see him." Marco nodded slowly, filing away every detail. The man against the wall tried to speak, but Marco held up that finger again, the one that commanded absolute silence. "Emma," Marco said, keeping his eyes on the girl. "I need you to walk over here and stand behind me. Can you do that?" She nodded and pushed herself away from the wall. Moving carefully around the man brought her here. As she passed him, he made a sudden grab for her arm, but Marco moved faster than should have been possible for a man his size. His hand shot out and caught man's wrist in a grip that made bones crack. "Don't," Marco said quietly. "Don't even think about it." The man's face contorted in pain, but he didn't dare try to pull away. Marco held his gaze for a long moment, communicating things that didn't need words, then released his grip. The man's hand fell to his side, useless and throbbing. Emma skewed behind Marco and pressed herself against his back, her small hands clutching at his jacket. For the first time since he'd seen her on the street, she looked like she might actually be safe. "Now then," Marco said, turning his full attention to the man who was still trying to disappear into solid brick. "Let's talk about what happens next." The man's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Sweat was pouring down his face despite the cool air in the alley, and his eyes kept darting toward the mouth of the alley where Vincent stood like a well-dressed wall. "You have exactly 30 seconds to tell me who you are, who you work for, and why you thought taking this child was a smart idea." Marco checked his watch with theatrical precision. "And I suggest you use those 30 seconds wisely because after that, my patience runs out." And trust me when I tell you that you don't want to see what happens when my patience runs out. The man opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Finally, words started tumbling out in a desperate rush. My name is Carl Morrison. I don't work for anybody. I swear. I thought she was alone in the park and I thought maybe. Marco's expression stopped in mid-sentence. 20 seconds, Marco said. Carl Morrison's face crumpled. I was going to take her somewhere safe, he said. And even he didn't seem to believe the words coming out of his own mouth. I wasn't going to hurt her. I've been watching her for weeks and she's so pretty and I thought maybe if I could just 10 seconds, Marco interrupted and his voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. The words that came next would change everything Emma thought she knew about the world. About the difference between good people and bad people, and about why sometimes the most dangerous person in the room might also be the only one willing to protect you. Carl Morrison looked directly at Marco Bellini and made the biggest mistake of his very short remaining life. He looked Marco dead in the eye and said the words that sealed his fate. You can't touch me. I know who you are, Marco Bellini, and I know you won't risk the heat that comes with hurting an innocent man in broad daylight. The FBI has been watching your every move for months. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the distant sounds of traffic seemed to fade away as Marco processed what he just heard. Behind him. Emma's grip on his jacket tightened, her small body trembling against his back. Vincent shifted uncomfortably at the mouth of the alley. In all his years working for Marco, he'd never seen anyone stupid enough to threaten the boss standing in a dark alley with nowhere to run. It was like watching someone play Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun. Marco's laugh was soft, almost gentle. But it made every hair on Carl Morrison's arms stand straight up. You think the FBI cares about men who snatch children from playgrounds? He said, taking another step forward. You think they're going to shed a single tear over someone who drags 8-year-old girls into dark alleys? Carl's bravado crumbled like wet paper. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The reality of his situation was finally sinking in. He wasn't dealing with some street thug who might be intimidated by threats about federal investigations. He was facing Marco Bellini, a man whose reputation had been built on making problems disappear permanently. Let me explain something to you, Carl Morrison, Marco continued, his voice never rising above a conversational tone. The FBI might be watching me. But they're not watching this alley right now. They're not watching you. And when a child predator goes missing in this city, nobody asks too many questions about where he went. Emma's voice came from behind Marco, bare above a whisper. Is he going to hurt me anymore? The question hit Marco like a physical blow. Here was this brave little girl who managed to signal for help, who found the courage to tell the truth about what was happening to her. And she was still afraid, still worried that somehow the nightmare wasn't over. No, sweetheart, Marco said without turning around, his eyes never leaving Carl's terrified face. He's never going to hurt you or any other child ever again. I promise you that. Carl must have heard something in Marco's tone that convinced him his 30 seconds were up. He made a desperate lunge toward the mouth of the alley, trying to push past Vincent and escape onto the crowded street. It was a pathetic attempt, fueled by panic and the kind of desperation that comes when someone finally realizes they're trapped with no way out. Vincent caught him easily, one massive hand clamping down on Carl's shoulder and spinning him around like he would nothing. Carl stumbled backward, crashing into the brick wall hard enough to scrape the skin off his palms. That's when Marco made a decision that would haunt Carl Morrison's nightmares for the rest of his very short life. Emma, Marco said gently, I need you to walk over to my friend Vincent. He's the big man by the street. He's going to take you somewhere safe while I finish talking to Carl here. Emma looked up at Marco with eyes that held far too much wisdom for him. 8-year-old. You're going to hurt him, aren't you? She said. It wasn't a question. Marco knelt down so he was at eye level with her, his expensive suit jacket bunching up around his knees. Sometimes, he said carefully, grown-ups have to make sure that bad people can't hurt children anymore. Do you understand what I'm telling you? She nodded solemnly. My daddy explained to me before he went to the army. He said, sometimes soldiers have to do hard things to protect people who can't protect themselves. Marco felt something twist in his chest. Your daddy sounds like a smart man, he said. And he'd be very proud of how brave you've been today. Emma reached into her pocket and pulled out a small crumpled piece of paper. It was a photograph worn and creased from being handled too many times. She held it out to Marco with shaking hands. The picture showed a young man in military fatigues, his arm around a woman who looked exactly like an older version of Emma. Both were smiling. The kind of genuine happiness that only comes from people who truly love each other. That's my daddy, Emma said. Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez. He's deployed somewhere in Afghanistan right now, but he's coming home for Christmas. Mom says he's fighting the bad guys so kids like me can be safe. Marco took the photograph and studied it for a long moment. Miguel Rodriguez had kind eyes and a strong jawline. The face of someone who dedicated his life to protecting others. The woman beside him, Emma's mother, had the same intelligent gaze as her daughter. What's your mother's name, Emma? Maria Rodriguez. She works at the hospital downtown. She was supposed to pick me up from the park. But she had to work late because someone got hurt real bad and they needed her to help save them. Marco handed the photograph back to Emma, his mind already working through the implications. A deployed soldier, a nurse working overtime to save lives. And their daughter left alone in a park where predators like Carl Morrison could spot her and follow her. Vincent, Marco called out, his voice carrying clearly through the alley. Take Emma to the car. Call Dr. Patricia Santos at Chicago General and tell her we need her to come to the office. Immediately. Tell her it's about Staff Sergeant Rodriguez's family and that it's urgent, but not medical. Emma's eyes widened. You know Dr. Santos? She asked. Marco smiled, the first genuine smile he'd shown since this whole situation began. Dr. Santos delivered you when you were born, sweetheart. She's been a friend of my family for a very long time. She's going to make sure you get home safe to your mother. As Vincent gently got Emma toward the street, she turned one more time. Mr. Marco, she said, using the title with the kind of natural respect children show to adults they instinctively trust. Yes, Emma. Thank you for seeing my safety. I was so scared nobody would understand what it meant. You did everything exactly right. Marco told her, you remembered what to do. You stayed brave, and you trusted the right person to help you. Your parents are going to be so proud when they hear this story. Emma nodded and walked away with Vincent, her yellow dress disappearing around the corner as they headed for the safety of Marco's car and the world beyond this dark alley. Now Marco was alone with Carl Morrison. And the temperature in the narrow space seemed to drop another 20 degrees. Carl had pressed himself so hard against the brick wall that the rough surface was leaving marks on his jacket. His eyes darted frantically between Marco and the mouth of the alley. Calculating distances and odds that even he knew were hopeless. Please, he whispered, his voice cracking like a teenager's. I never actually hurt her. I never touched her inappropriately. I was just going to keep her for a while, maybe take some pictures. I wasn't going to do anything really bad. Marco's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went completely cold. Do you know what I think is interesting about what you just said, Carl? Carl shook his head frantically. You said you weren't going to do anything really bad, which means you were planning to do something. Something that you consider not really bad, but that would terrify an 8-year-old girl whose father is fighting overseas to keep her safe. I didn't mean it like that, Carl stammered. I just meant I wasn't going to kill her or anything like that. I'm not a monster. Marco took a step closer and Carl actually whimpered. Let me tell you what I think you are, Carl Morrison. I think you're the kind of man who watches children playing in parks and follows them when they're alone. I think you're the kind of man who has a collection of pictures somewhere in your apartment would make decent people sick to their stomachs. And I think you're the kind of man who tells himself he is not really hurting anyone because you haven't crossed that final line yet. Every word hit Carl like a physical blow because every word was true. His face went white, then gray, as he realized that Marco Bellini could see straight through all his self-justifications and excuses to the rotten core underneath. But here's what else I think, Marco continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I think you've been planning to cross that line for a long time. I think Emma Rodriguez was going to be your first, but definitely not your last. And I think the only reason you haven't done it before is because you never found the right opportunity. Carl's legs gave out and he slid down the brick wall until he was sitting on the dirty ground of the alley. Tears were streaming down his face now. But they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of self-pity, the kind that predators shed when they finally get caught. Please don't kill me, he sobbed. I have a mother. I have a sister. They don't know of any of this. They think I'm a good person. Marco studied him for a long moment. His head tilted slightly to one side like he was considering something. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his cell phone. Carl's eyes went wide. He expected violence, expected threats, expected the kind of brutal ending that men like Marco Bellini were famous for delivering. He hadn't expected a phone call. Marco dialed a number and waited for someone to answer. Detective Morrison, he said when the call connected. This is Marco Bellini. I have something that belongs to you. There was a pause. Then Marco continued, I'm in the alley between 5th and Madison, about 50 yards in from the street. I have a man here named Carl Morrison who just attempted to abduct an 8-year-old girl named Emma Rodriguez. The child is safe and has been returned to medical supervision, but I think you're going to want to have a very long conversation with Mr. Morrison about his hobbies and interests. Carl's mouth fell open. Marco was calling the police on himself while standing in an alley with a man he could have made disappear without anyone ever asking questions. Another pause. Then Marco smiled grimly. No, detective. He is unharmed and conscious, though I suspect that condition might change rapidly once he gets to lock up and the other inmates find out what he was planning to do to a soldier's daughter. Marco did the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Then he knelt down in front of Carl, bringing himself to eye level with the broken man sitting in the dirt. You want to know why I'm not going to kill you, Carl Morrison? Marco said quietly. Carl nodded frantically. Because death would be too easy for you. Because Emma Rodriguez deserves to see justice done the right way through courts and judges and juries. Because her father is overseas fighting for the idea that civilized people solve problems through law and order, not through violence in dark alleys. Marco stood up and brushed an invisible speck of dust off his jacket. But mostly, he continued. Because I want you to spend the next 25 years in a maximum security prison thinking about what almost happened to that little girl. I want you to wake up every morning knowing that every other inmate knows exactly why you're there. And I want you to go to sleep every night wondering if tomorrow is the day when someone decides that child predators don't deserve to keep living. The sound of sirens was getting closer now, echoing off the buildings and bouncing through the narrow alley. Carl Morrison sat in the dirt and cried, knowing that his life as he'd known it was over. In about 30 seconds, he'd be in handcuffs. In a few hours, he'd be in a cell. In a few months, he'd be starting a prison sentence that would likely last until he was an old man, if he lived that long. Marco straightened his tie and walked toward the mouth of the alley, leaving Carl Morrison alone with his thoughts and his tears and the approaching sirens that would carry him away from the free world forever. As he reached the street, Marco could see Vincent standing beside the black SUV with Emma Rodriguez. She was sitting in the back seat talking animatedly on Vincent's phone to someone who was probably her mother. Her yellow dress was still bright in the afternoon sunlight, and she was smiling for the first time since Marco had seen her. Dr. Patricia Santos was just pulling up in her own car. A woman in her 50s with silver hair and the kind of competent presence that made people feel safe just by being near her. She delivered hundreds of babies during her career, including Emma Rodriguez 8 years ago. And Marco knew she'd make sure the little girl got home safely to her mother. Vincent approached Marco as the police cars turned into the street, their lights flashing, but their sirens now silent. "Boss," Vincent said quietly. "That was either the smartest thing you've ever done or the most dangerous." Marco watched as Detective Morrison stepped out of the first patrol car. A tall man with graying temples who'd been working Chicago streets for 20 years. He was honest, which was rare. He was competent, which was rarer. And he understood that sometimes the world was complicated enough that good people had to work together even when they weren't supposed to. "Maybe both," Marco replied. "But that little girl gets to go home tonight. Her father gets to come back from Afghanistan to a daughter who is safe and whole. And Carl Morrison never gets the chance to hurt another child." Vincent nodded slowly. The math made sense. Even if the methods were unconventional. As Detective Morrison approached, Marco could see Emma Rodriguez waving at him from the back seat of Dr. Santos's car. She was holding up that worn photograph of her father, showing it to the doctor with obvious pride. "Mr. Bellini," Detective Morrison said as he reached them. "This is either going to be a very long conversation or a very short one." Marco smiled and extended his hand for a handshake. "That depends entirely on whether you think justice was served today, Detective." The two men shook hands while behind them. Other officers were pulling Carl Morrison out of the alley in handcuffs. He was still crying, still begging, still trying to convince anyone who would listen that he wasn't really a bad person. Nobody was listening. 6 months later, Emma Rodriguez stood on a stage at her elementary school, speaking to an auditorium full of parents and children about the rescue signal that saved her life. Her father, Staff Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez, sat in the front row in his dress uniform, home safely from deployment. Beside him, her mother, Maria, wiped away tears of pride as Emma demonstrated the simple hand gesture that had changed everything. Marco Bellini watched from the back of the room, wearing a simple dark suit instead of his usual expensive attire. He kept his promise to stay in touch, quietly, ensuring that the Rodriguez family never wanted for anything. While Miguel,